Hello everyone, I am Conrad Stump with the Springfield Greene County Library. Thank you all for joining us tonight for our program, Into the Darkness with Laura McHugh. Before I introduce our guest, I'd like to thank the Ozarks Studies Institute, an initiative of the Missouri State University Libraries, for sponsoring this event. So Laura McHugh is the internationally best-selling author of 4 novels. Her first novel, The Weight of Blood, won the International Thriller Writers Award, amongst others, and her work has been nominated for numerous awards, including the American Library Association Alex Award and a Pushcart Prize. McHugh's recently released novel, What's Done in Darkness, which we're here to talk about tonight, has been named one of Oprah Daily's best beach reads of 2021. Please join me in welcoming Laura McHugh. Hello, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm always excited to come back to Springfield and visit.
Right, yeah. And so, yes, before we kind of get into the book, I wanted to talk to you, since this is a library and a library event. I'm curious to know a bit about your relationship to libraries and reading when you were growing up.
Yes, I mean, reading was my favorite thing when I was growing up. But when we moved down to the Ozarks, we moved down to Tecumseh, Missouri, and there is no library there. That was devastating for me as a kid, but it did lead me to reading a lot of things I wouldn't have picked up on my own because I would just read whatever was around, like my older brother's books for English class and my mom's magazines and things like that. But I did go to library school. I have a degree in library and information science.
I was very intrigued to see that.
Yeah. Yes, I haven't actually worked in a library in many years, but
That's okay. What they don't tell you when you're younger too, right, is that you often don't end up doing what you thought you were going to end up doing.
yeah, I have 3 degrees and I'm not really using any of that right now.
I've been in a similar situation. So for those who haven't had the chance to read it yet, can you tell us a bit about What's Done in Darkness?
Yeah, this one is set down in the Ozarks in southern Missouri and northern Arkansas. And it's about a young woman whose family joins this really strict backwoods church. And it's kind of where the girls have to wear the long dresses and grow their hair long, and they're homeschooled. And it's very, very strict. And Sarah Beth does not really like this new lifestyle they've adopted, and she'd really like to kind of escape, and she's kind of waiting to turn 18 and, get out of there. But before that can happen, she's abducted from her family's roadside produce stand. And she is held captive for about a week, and then she is found alive at the side of the highway out near Branson. And no one really believes her story about what happened. She doesn't have a lot of details about what happened to her. Her family is kind of trying to distance from her, and this ends up being the way that she does get out of the Ozarks to kind of start a new life, and so she's trying to do that. But the book really begins about 5 years later. She gets a call, and this investigator says, I believe your story, I believe what happened to you, and there is another missing girl, and I think this case is related to yours, and I want you to come back to the Ozarks with me, which is the last thing in the world she wants to do, face her estranged family and, the sight of all this horror, but she does.
So I'm interested to know, right, when you're starting to write a book, do you start with a character, do you start with sort of a storyline in mind, a title, like how does that seed grow, and can you kind of talk about some of the inspiration behind What's Done in Darkness?
Yeah, my stories all start in different ways. Like The Weight of Blood just started with the setting. I wanted to write about the Ozarks because I had moved to the Ozarks as a young kid, and it's such a fascinating and unique place. I mean, as all of you know, I'm sure. And so I just started writing about the Ozarks. That was my very first book. But as I was writing that, I came across a true crime story that had happened in Lebanon, Missouri, which is where I went to high school. And from there, I've been inspired a lot by various true crimes in my writing. And with What's Done in Darkness, there were several different crimes that kind of came together as an inspiration for the story. Part of it was a woman named Sherry Papini. I don't know if any of you remember that case. A few years ago, a woman in California, and she vanished while she was out jogging. And she had a husband and kids at home, and she was just gone. And I think it was a month or more, on Thanksgiving morning, she was found. She was running down the side of the highway. She had like chains on her. It was just something terrible had happened to her, but she couldn't really tell them what it was or who had done it. And I always wondered, what really happened to her during that time. I was just fascinated by thinking about that. And the other part of it was all these stories that you see in the news about these children. Very fascinated by this. Children who are isolated. Sometimes they're homeschooled. It's not about the homeschooling, but sometimes they're isolated in that way. Sometimes they're isolated by being, part of a religious community where they're not out in the outside world. And some of these kids are, adopted or foster children, but some of them are not. But I just kept seeing case after case in the news of these kids where nobody knew anything was going on with them until, one of them escapes and they go back to the house and the kids are chained to the bed, or they're being starved, or, they're being beaten or abused, and no one has known. Or, oh, no one has seen that kid in 4 years, and it turns out she's buried in the front yard. And I kept seeing these cases over and over, just so many of them, and I was just thinking about that and how these children, when they're isolated in a certain way, how anything can happen to them. There's no one looking out for them. There's no teacher to notice, that something's going on, and no pediatrician, and no one else is seeing what's happening to these kids, and it's very easy for them to disappear.
Yeah, well, that kind of brings me to my next question, just about the Ozarks, because, right, your work has been described as Ozarks Noir, and so I'm curious not only about what draws you to the region as a setting, but also sort of how the region lends itself to these sort of true crime-inspired stories that you're telling, right? What is it about the Ozarks that allows people to kind of disappear, and how is it different than living in a city or something?
Yeah, I mean, for years and years, the Ozarks has been a place where people might come and hide if they've committed some crimes elsewhere. There are some infamous cases of that, and people have just been hiding here in the Ozarks for years, and nobody knew what they had done in their previous life. Something that struck me when we moved here was, I'd lived in a town, a small town, but I'd lived in town. And then to move out way in the middle of nowhere, there were no houses around us. There was nothing, you couldn't see anything around us but just, the woods and the hills. And to me, it was very kind of intimidating. It was a little bit scary, and just thinking anything could happen out here. No one would know. And in fact, we lived just down the other fork in the road from the East Wind commune. There's a whole commune out there that people don't know about. Those people are just out there. And the Covenant Sword in the Arm of the Lord, of course, was down there in Gainesville when we were there. And that militia group, hiding out in the woods. It just seemed like, being the remote location, this rugged location, it was easy to hide things. You could hide crimes, you could hide a person. So that was something that ever since I was a little kid. And the first thing, and I've mentioned this, I tell this story all the time, but when we moved into our house down in Tecumseh, and my brother was like, there's some old lady out yelling up at the up at the edge of the property. And we weren't familiar with, this kind of thing, and we went out there, and she didn't want to come on our property without asking. She was very kind, and we were talking to her, and she said, if you see a grave in the woods, keep walking. And I was a little kid who was not used to being out in the woods, and I was like, who did she kill? Who did she bury in the woods? When obviously she was talking probably about, family graves, that sort of thing. But just from that very beginning, I just had kind of this ominous feeling about the place. It's beautiful, and it was my home, but I also would always think, what's happening down in that holler or in that cave?
Yeah. Well, and I always think like, oh, nothing sounds better than just living out in the woods where you have no neighbors and you just have the quiet. But then it's also sort of like, oh wait, I'm all alone out in the woods, and like no one would know. And also like, if anything happens, it's gonna take a while for anyone to get to you. But yeah, I used to think while driving, like, through a very scenic region, lots of woods, lots of bridges, like, how many bodies are out here,
Probably a lot. And
right.
Honestly, there are a lot of gruesome crimes that take place in the Ozarks that inspire my work. I'm usually writing about, a Missouri crime.
Yeah. So I want to kind of talk about something that I really was drawn to, especially with this book, was how you kind of tackle women's lives, and especially the women like Sarah Beth who are maybe, poor, isolated, maybe their destiny is to end up, doing something that's maybe not seen as remarkable, but who I really like that you give these characters so much depth and worth. And so I'm interested to know kind of what draws you to these women's stories, and sort of what you're hoping to convey, with these women's lives.
Yeah, part of it just comes from sort of writing what you know, and we were very poor, living in the Ozarks, the working poor, and you see a lot of that, and I feel like a lot of that is not always written about and explored in fiction. There are so many, especially like contemporary thriller novels now, domestic suspense, it's like, wealthy Manhattanites doing this and that, and to me, I want to write about the kind of people that I come from and the experiences that I had, in southern Missouri. And also just having left southern Missouri, living in other places and traveling. And I feel like some people do have kind of this perception of people in this part of the country all being the same. Like we're all the same kind of people and they have a certain view of us. And that's not the case at all. There's so many different kinds of people.
Yeah.
Here, and women living all kinds of different lives, but also a lot of obstacles from, living in some of the rural areas where there are not a lot of opportunities, and maybe it's kind of hard to get out of that situation and that sort of thing.
Yeah, right, there's stuff that people don't understand, and I think, yes, right, people often think like, oh, they could just leave, but sometimes you don't have the means to leave. You don't have transportation, or if you're just used to sort of like this environment, then it's very easy to kind of fall into sticking with that environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And if your family has lived somewhere for generations and that's all you've had and that's very important to you, I mean, it can be hard. You might not even really know how to figure out to start over someplace else. It can be really hard.
Yeah, ties that bind.
Yeah. Yeah. My characters are always like either torn between, being drawn back to home, or trying to get out. They're trying to leave, and so I keep going back and forth on that.
Yeah, I think that's pretty, one of those things we all sort of have, right? So we have that family connection, and, you're wanting to do your own thing, but then you're also sort of drawn back to them. But one of the things that made me so angry in the book was the sheriff that Sarah Beth talks to after she's found, and I just like, oh, I hate you so much. and he doesn't believe her, and then there's a lot of doubt, not only cast by him, but doubt cast by other people. So it was making me think about what that doubt sort of says about our culture and how it can influence not only victims of abuse, but sort of how it can influence those who might perpetrate those crimes, right? Like how does it encourage them almost?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are so many cases where, children aren't believed or women aren't believed. Something happens to you and you're trying to say, this person did this to me. A lot of times it's dismissed or disbelieved. That happens really frequently, almost to the point where then, the victim can start to doubt, what did I do to cause this to happen? This must be my fault, or, maybe it didn't happen the way that I thought, and it's very damaging, if you're not believed when this trauma happens to you. And as far as, how that affects perpetrators, I think you see a lot of things where someone in some position that they don't think they'll be questioned, a priest, a teacher, that sort of thing. I mean, you see cases of abuse like that where, children, they're like, oh, they're disbelieved, and it's like, oh, a person in that position, a policeman or whatever, wouldn't do that, but we all know those kinds of things happen, and so no one's above suspicion to me. I'm suspicious of everyone. I mean, it doesn't matter,
Probably a good way to be, just,
Yeah, very suspicious person.
But yeah, there are like expectations of, what you would do in a situation, like how you would react, what the telltale signs would be, right? The sheriff had so many things that were, well, this is how you should be. So that was really interesting, sort of the expectations that are put on to
a victim. Yeah, they think you should behave a certain way, and maybe you weren't really victimized if you're not behaving the way that I think that you should be. That sort of thing. Yeah,
so I found that fascinating. And sort of speaking of expectations, I was really interested in Sarah Beth's relationship with her sister Sylvie and with her childhood friend Retta. And right, like when Sarah Beth and Retta were kids, Retta was all about getting married, and Sarah Beth didn't necessarily want that. And so she kind of runs into this again as an adult with her younger sister. But it was making me think about, right, these sort of nuanced familial relationships. And, I like how you show how they connect despite that. And it was also making me think about the expectations that we sometimes put on our peers, or people who are like us, and we think they should want something for their lives. So I was wondering if you could talk to sort of that, the roles of women in like family relationships.
Yeah, I'm the youngest of 8 kids, and there were 4 boys and 4 girls. And I feel like I would be a person who would want people to get along and just trying to, oh hey, like find that common ground, try to get along. And part of that also goes to, I get asked this a lot about this book in interviews. People are like, well, how are you writing about the people in this area? And, people other places think, oh, we're all a certain political group, or we all have this certain beliefs or whatever. And I think I grew up being very good at wanting people to get along and to make peace, no matter what. And because I think there's common ground amongst people, no matter what their varying different belief systems are. And I think women are put in that position a lot too, like trying to get along and make the peace. But yeah, being the youngest of all of those people, I always was observing all of those things too. And so I think I've just always been observing those relationships and trying to figure those things out.
Yeah, that's really interesting, just about being the youngest. I was the youngest for 8 years until my sister was born, so I think there is a lot of that sort of like, the attention is less on me as like lower down the the line, and so you are sort of more observant of what's going on. So I think that's interesting. So I'm curious to know sort of what you hope people get out of what's done in darkness, what you want them to take away from it.
For me, a lot of what I was writing about is about women's issues, and I write about crime all the time, and people are like, why do you write about all of these dark things? And it's because I'm seeing constantly, every day in the news, about terrible things happening to women. I mean, they happen to everyone, not just women, but to children and to women especially are the ones that I'm drawn to. And just have people be aware of those sorts of things, like with The Way to Blood, I was writing about human trafficking in rural areas in the Midwest. And there were so many people, I had so much pushback of people saying, these kinds of things don't happen here. This is so extreme, this is so outlandish, this is kind of ridiculous. And I was like, well, it's partly inspired by a true trafficking case that happened in the small town where I lived, and it happens everywhere. And so I think just opening people's thoughts to, paying attention to the things that are going on like that, and to be on the lookout for that, because a lot of things like this, when these women are victimized or these children are victimized or abused, there were people who knew something was going on, or people who had some idea or had seen some things, and people don't like to get involved in other people's business, and I do understand that too, and especially like in the Ozarks and stuff, it's the whole thing like, well, yeah, everybody's business because it's a small town, but also if you're a good neighbor, you're staying out of your neighbor's business. You know what I mean? There's that balance there. And so a lot of these things that happen, it's like people look back like, oh gosh, I could have said something, I could have done something. But yeah, I'm always writing about the dark things that are happening in our very midst, in our backyard. And no matter how outlandish something might be in a story that I'm writing, something real will happen that is even worse, as we know.
Yes.
It's all around.
Yeah, well, that's kind of my next question, because I was intrigued to read that you, when you were growing up, you like horror and Southern Gothic, and your work really does sort of straddle that line where it's not quite horror, but there are these sort of darker elements, the sort of Gothic element, and definitely horrible things happen. So I was, wondering how you sort of, straddle that line between something that is sort of horrific, but is realistic, and is the real world scarier than anything supernatural?
It is. I mean, it absolutely is, and I've said this before too. It's like you can close a book, you can turn off a movie, but real life, I mean, it's here. It's all around us. And so I do like writing just kind of right up to the edge of horror because I am on the more like realistic side of things. I try to depict crimes in a realistic way of how they happen, not sensationalize them, but really look at the human aspect of those crimes and the people that are affected by it.
Well, so, one of the things that I was thinking about when I think about why I like horror is I feel like it gives people a sort of safe space to interact with what they find scary in the world. And so I'm kind of curious to know, since you do write about true crime, like, why are people so into true crime stories? What is it about people that makes them just eat it up?
I mean, there are lots of reasons. Do a lot of you follow true crime or listen to podcasts and all of that? I mean, I think part of it is you're kind of trying to prepare, like, how can I avoid this happening to me? Like, okay, obviously I'm not gonna park by a van at night in a parking lot. Like, I avoid that. I mean, you're kind of looking at what happened to people and thinking, how can I make sure that's not me? But also partly trying to make sense of it. Trying to make sense of, why do people do bad things? Why do people do terrible things like this? And how do people work through it when it happens to you? That's another part. And then a further part for me is mysteries. I've always been just fascinated by mysteries. If there's some sort of puzzle, I want to know the answer to it. If there's some sort of unsolved crime, I want to think it through and figure out what might have happened and try to solve that. And so there's, the fascination and fear that this could happen to us, not wanting it to happen to us, trying to work through it, and then just, there's a lot to it there. But especially for me, the cold cases.
Yes.
I love to listen to cold cases because I think, you know what, if we really think through this, I think we can crack it. I was thinking, we can solve this. It just needs more eyes on it.
Yeah, it was so interesting to me when, they not redid Unsolved Mysteries, which they did do, but they sort of put all the old episodes out and they had updates for everything. Yeah. But then when you would see one where it didn't have an update, you were just oh, this was so long ago, and it's probably not going to get solved. But then it's so interesting. You're just like, I want to know, and why has this not been solved? It was clearly the husband.
Most of the time, right? And I don't know if you all have seen, this one wasn't a crime, I guess, but it was that family out in California that went hiking, the husband and wife and their baby and their dog, and they were all dead. And the autopsy didn't reveal anything, and they're waiting on toxicology. I check for updates every single day.
So
I'm like,
creepy.
what was it? What could it be? I was asking people, what do you think it was? What do you think happened?
Well, if you went hiking, what if I go hiking and this happens to me?
Exactly, yeah.
I want to know what happened to them so I can feel better about the fact that it won't happen to me.
And I'm thinking it must have happened so quickly they couldn't even make a call, or were they trying to they didn't have a signal? I had all these questions. It's like the articles are not thorough enough for me. I want to know, I have a lot more questions.
That's so funny. So did you read a lot of mystery stories when you were growing up? Have you liked mysteries? And how did you sort of come to think, oh, I want to be a mystery writer?
Yeah, I mean, I did always like dark and creepy things, not necessarily mysteries strictly. I read a lot of Stephen King as a kid, Shirley Jackson, which we talked about. I love her. But I read a lot of Ray Bradbury and science fiction, and a lot of literary fiction, poetry. I really read very widely, and I never thought about mysteries really specifically. And when I started writing The Weight of Blood, my goal was I wanted the reader to keep turning the pages and not be able to put the book down. That was my whole goal, really, with writing this book. And it did not occur to me the entire time that I was writing a mystery, which sounds ridiculous, because it is. It's a thriller, it's a mystery, it's suspense. I didn't think about it at all until I was querying agents to try to sell my novel, and the agent that I signed with, she's like, well, this is kind of, I thought it was a literary novel. She said, it's more like literary suspense, it's a mystery. And it's like, oh my gosh. And I was thinking, I've liked a lot of mystery novels and mystery authors. I hadn't thought that I was one. It was that suspense that keeps you turning the pages, and I just hadn't really put that together. Which sounds crazy, but it was a very natural fit for me, just always liking dark things and always wanting to figure out, answer those questions.
So have you, sort of as an adult and as a writer, has it made you become more interested in reading mysteries, or do you sort of try to avoid them for influence? Have you read more mysteries because you're writing mysteries now?
I absolutely have, and really, I hardly have any pleasure reading at all where I get to choose what I read, just because I receive a lot of books to blurb, those little quotes on the back of a book. I get sent those all the time to read, write blurbs. I'm reading Simone St. James's new book right now for a blurb. So I do a lot of that, and I've also been a judge a couple of years for a debut novel award. And so in those years, it's in the thriller category, and I read more than 100 of those in about 8 months or so when I'm doing that. So it's like mystery, all the time. So I do, when I have a chance, I do try to read some other things because I do really enjoy other things, but it's harder now to fit that in.
Yeah.
And you do kind of want to stay up on what's happening in your genre and in the publishing industry. So
when you get that chance to sort of go outside of the mystery zone, what is it that you're wanting to pick up?
it's pretty random. Okay, I just read Lydia Millay, I don't know how to say her last name, a children's Bible, and it's kind of an apocalyptic story. I like apocalypse movies and stories, zombie things I'm very into. I could watch any zombie movie or show, it never gets old. They can always think of something new to do with them. So I like that kind of thing. Yeah, so it could be any random thing that comes my way.
That's making me think too, since your work does sort of straddle this line, but sticks in reality, are you interested in sort of crossing over into more sort of gothic or horror or, exploring something supernatural?
I do have an idea for a horror novel. I don't know if I will ever write it, but it's set in a hospital, a woman who's giving birth, because I had a horrific experience with my first child, and it was the whole time while this was going on, I was like taking notes. Everything that happens to me, I'm constantly taking these mental notes, and I didn't know I was doing it earlier in life, like why, but I know now that was everything was being squirreled away for stories. I use those things all the time, and so when I was in the hospital was there like a little over a week, and just storing away all these. I'm like, this would make an excellent horror novel if I can ever, sit down and write it. But
yes, and so then the other thing I wanted to ask, and you kind of touched on this, but if is there a book that you've read recently that you would want to recommend to people, or an author that you think that more people should know about? Like, what's a book or author that you want more people to pick up? Besides yourself, of course.
I would be thrilled if you read more. Well, two of my author friends who I think write very similar things to me are Julia Haberlin and Amy Engel. We're all friends, and they write kind of dark, like Midwestern or Southern, like Texas, sort of mysteries that are kind of creepy and dark. I really like them a lot. And I love people to read them. And something I read recently that I read the new Paula Hawkins book, Slow Fire Burning, because I interviewed her and did this event for her tour. And I had liked Girl on the Train, everybody did, but I read her new book and I thought it was so good. It was much more like mature and more layered and deeper. It was very character driven, and I love character driven stories are my favorite. I could read almost anything if I'm drawn into the characters, and she did an amazing job with that.
Oh, great. I've seen it, and it's sort of like on my peripheral, like, I'm interested in this, so that's good to know. And then obviously, right, you have a connection to the Ozarks, so I was wondering, what's one of your favorite places in the Ozarks region, or favorite things in the Ozarks region, and that you think more people should appreciate or visit or know about?
Yeah. Well, it's beautiful. We were talking about this earlier. The whole place is beautiful. I have been accused of ruining the tourism industry, which is silly. It's a gorgeous place, obviously, and I love it. There's a lot to do. The rivers are all amazing. I love to go floating. But something I haven't done yet that I really want to do, I heard they've completed big sections of the Ozark Trail.
Oh, okay.
Sort of like, it's sort of like the Pacific Crest Trail or the Appalachian Trail or whatever, but it's in the Ozarks going through, and people are going, taking these long journeys through there and camping out and just exploring these very rugged parts of the Ozarks, just out in the woods, and I think that is really cool. Although I heard a horrible story about spiders on that trail, and spiders are my least favorite. Someone had this, this netting thing over their hat, and at the end of the day, and they took it off, and there were just like all these spiders all in it, and I thought, well, maybe I won't go on the Ozark Trail yet, but I would really like to one day.
Yes, like to avoid spiders at all costs.
Yes, absolutely.
Not my favorite. All right, well, yeah, I'd like to open it up to questions from the audience, if anyone else has questions that they'd like to ask Laura. Yes?
Are you working on anything right now? Anything coming up?
I am, yeah. I'm about halfway done with my next book. I need to turn it in by the end of the year. So I'm not sure what the pub date will be yet on that, but I'm definitely hard at work. Yes.
What were your other 2 degrees?
My first degree was in English, and I graduated and had no idea what to do with that. I worked as a secretary for a while, and then I went back to grad school. I have a degree in computer science as well. And I worked as a software developer for about 10 years. And I worked in a basement writing insurance software with a group of men for, no windows. It was just dark all the time, very cold. And I liked it well enough, But I lost my job. I was laid off while I was pregnant from that job, and that's when I started writing my first book. So it worked out in the end. Yes.
Have you given any thought to writing something inspired by the 3 missing women in Springfield?
Yes, I've always been so interested in that case. I graduated the same time that they graduated. I was in Lebanon, they were in Springfield, and I was working the drive-thru at McDonald's that summer. And right after it had happened, it was like that next week, and this man came through the drive-thru really late at night, and he was like, "Have you heard about those girls, those missing girls?" And I was like, "Yeah. Everybody has." And he goes, "Are you scared to walk to your car at night when you get out of work?" I was like, "I am now." And I just always, that's another case where just not knowing what happened. It's like there's got to be some clue, there's got to be something. And though I feel if I wrote about that, it would probably be more of a true crime and not fictionalized, just the case itself. So interesting, and I would love to have that solved. I'm always checking for updates on that one.
Yeah, do you have any sort of nonfiction projects that you work on or think about, things that you'd like to cover?
I do. Well, this is stuff that hasn't really happened yet, but I've spoken to, a production company just talks about, true crimes in the Missouri region and how that could possibly be made into, shows and that sort of thing.
People would love it.
I would love to work on something like that, I think it's so interesting. And I write essays now and then, but it takes me forever to write an essay. I could write chapters of a book and I would just be still sitting there struggling with paragraph 1 of an essay. I just want it to be perfect, and I just cannot stop working on it. So.
Well, I'm sure it's this way with fiction too, but right, when you're writing nonfiction, you're just sort of like, every sentence you're thinking, is that accurate? Is that,
yes,
do I know
it
that's
is
accurate?
so much harder when you have to follow the truth. And it just really is. And one of my high school teachers is here, so I'm not going to say I ever fudged anything on a research paper, but I would get very, very tempted because I would say, well, it would have a lot bigger impact if the person said this, or if this happened. It would just make the story fit together better, but it's like, dang it didn't happen that way, and it's so frustrating. Fiction, I love that because I'm writing inspired by true things, but I twist it into whatever suits the story.
Yeah. Well, if you just put that inspired by, if you just put that right on the cover, you can do anything.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, my sister will get so mad. She's like, there'll be a little seed of truth of something that maybe happened in our family, and she'll get so mad. She's like, well, that's not what happened. You twisted this all into something crazy. I'm like, I know. It's not. It's fiction. It's fiction now. That was just the inspiration. Yeah. That's my job. Yes.
Have you ever had a character in your book that you couldn't control, that just went their own?
Not really, not so much, but sometimes things do happen that are kind of unexpected, that you didn't plan or that you didn't see coming, but that then you realize, oh, that makes total sense for this character and what they would do, and like what their motivations are. So they can kind of surprise you in that way. Yes.
How much does your editor or publisher or whoever have to redo your work before it actually comes out?
Well, it really is different every time. Like with The Weight of Blood, she really hardly did anything at all, but like all of her questions were Ozark related. She's like, nobody's gonna know what a holler is. Like, you gotta figure out some way to like give definitions for all these things. Nobody knows what any of this is. So there are things like that. And then I have a new editor on this book. It's my first time with this editor, and she hardly did anything, and it made me really nervous. She's like, okay, great, let's send it to copy editing. I'm like, no, give it back to me. I'm gonna go through it one more time because there's gotta be more stuff to change in here. But I've also had the other end of it. I had one of my books, it took me about 6 months to rewrite it. And it wasn't that the editor thought it was bad or something. She didn't like the direction that it went. And that was the only one out of the 4 really where I had to kind of rethink what I was doing and kind of reshape the book. So that it can happen.
Which book was that?
That was Wolf Once In.
Yes.
To go back to nonfiction for a moment, you mentioned this family in California and how you're following it. And of course you have so many resources available these days, you know, digital especially. And you know, could you see yourself, because of that, the wealth of resources, doing something in what they call true crime? You know, I think back 60, 70 years, if I understand the story correctly, Truman Capote just happened to be looking at the New York Times that day and saw that obituary of the obscure farmer in western Kansas, you know, and that blew up into, of course, in cold blood. But I could just as easily see him writing a novel instead, and of course he didn't do that, but he wrote in cold blood. Could you see yourself doing a true crime if it were interesting enough and you had enough detail?
Yeah, I just think it would take me a really long time probably to write it. Just like those darn facts again, like we were talking about. I mean, you have to be so much more careful, and it's so much more important to get everything right in that case, especially when it's, you know, some horrible crime that's affected real people and you want to get it right. I think it would just take me so long to do it that it's probably going to be like a later in life project for me. Something I could do later in life and just work on a little bit at a time.
Then you have to remember like your sources and where you got this thing and like where did I put that piece of paper?
I know, right?
And, yeah, just oh wait, I need some proof of this.
Yeah. Although I think it would be fascinating to be an investigator. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know what kind of investigator. Like, is there some job I can have where I just volunteer and I like try to solve crimes, try to solve old crimes?
Investigative consultant.
Yes, yes. Because I'd be like, well, did you think of this? Like, think through this. This could have happened. Like, I was very sad when I realized I was too old to ever join the FBI. You have to be, I think, is it 30 something? It's like rats. I wish I would have thought of this earlier. That would have been a good job for me.
Oh, back there, yes.
When I read the book, I kept going back to Sarah Beth's parents. And I thought you did a good job of showing the balance, because I kept thinking, these parents are no good. They're not doing what they should. But of course they loved their children and thought they were doing well for them. And I thought you did a really good job of kind of showing that, because I sometimes think with parents, of course they love their children and want what's best, and they might disagree with me over what that is, but so I thought they were really, they're in a way in the background, but in a way they were central.
Oh, thank you. And yeah, I was trying to show various things with those parents as far as what they were trying to do right, and then where they kind of, ways that they went wrong and maybe
did a
didn't.
lot of thinking about that.
Yeah, oh good, thank you.
You had a question.
When you start a book, do you know exactly what's going to happen and how it's going to end up, or does it evolve?
It evolves. And when I wrote my first book, The Weight of Blood, I did not have a plot in mind. I didn't have a story. I had nothing. And this was, I had just lost my job, and my husband was like, well, maybe this is your chance to write a book. Maybe you should try to write a book. And it's like, okay, I was about to have my second baby. I had a toddler at home. And I'm like, okay, I'll just write this book. But I didn't want him to be like, okay, maybe you should go hunt for a new job again. So he would be asking me every day. He's like lurking over my shoulder. How's the book going? You're like, oh, it's going really great. It's going really great. And I'm just typing, and I had no idea where the story was going. I was just randomly writing things. And I did that. I was about halfway through the book before I realized what had happened to the girl who was killed and the girl that had disappeared. I had no idea until I was about halfway through. And then it all came together. And then it was just a rush, to get to the end. And then the second book, I tried to plot out in advance because I was under contract and had deadlines, and I thought it would go much quicker. And I hated it that way. It was not interesting anymore. It was not surprising. And so I scrapped that and just let the story grow organically. And they call it, you're a plotter, you plot the book out, or you're a pantser, you write by the seat of your pants. And I'm definitely more of a pantser. Although over time, book by book, I've gotten a little bit better about figuring out at least kind of where the story's going. It might not end up exactly where I think it will, but at least now I usually start with more direction, which is a little less stressful. It's very stressful when you're just writing and you have no idea where you're going or if you will reach the end.
Any other questions?
Jim?
Do you have a favorite true crime like this?
I listen to so many of them. Did you ever listen to In the Dark? Season 1 of that.
That question. I don't listen to podcasts.
Well, season 1 of In the Dark was really, really good. It's about the Jacob Wetterling case and some of those that was really good. I've been listening to Crime Junkie lately. I listened to The Vanish. True Crime Garage. There's just so many, and I just kind of cycle through them. Like when I'm mowing the grass or I'm driving or something, I just have them. I have them on, and I have to be so careful because my kids, don't want to listen to murder stuff, obviously, and so they'll remind me if I have it on in the car and I've forgotten, and they're like, "Oh my God, Mom, turn that off." So I feel kind of bad. I don't know what all they've been exposed to on accident all this time, but maybe it'll keep them safe somehow later in life. They'll be very cautious about things. Yes.
So as a professional writer, do you have like a routine? Is it so many words a day? Is it morning? Is there a time of day? Is there a place that you like to write?
Yeah, that changes over time, but I do have to treat it as a job since I have deadlines, and so I do try to write every day as much as I can if possible. I go for about 1,000 words a day is my goal, at least, and I do not always hit that, but I'll do writing sprints where I set a timer, and I can't check my email, I can't get on my phone, I can't do anything else. I just have to write until the timer goes off and then take a little break. And Amy Engel and I actually, we'll text each other because she's on deadline too. We'll text, we're like, okay, let's start a sprint right now. And they'll be like, how many words did you get? And that's like, I only got 200 words. It's kind of depressing. But for me, if I keep that momentum up and just do a little bit each day, that works out for me. And when my kids were younger and I had no time, I would stay up all night. I would write all night. I would drink coffee all night and write all night because that was the time that I had. And so I got really into night writing. But now, I'm a few years older and I feel like I'm so tired at the end of the day that I'm having a real struggle doing my night writing. So now I try to do it first thing in the morning. And yeah, it varies a lot, but it's my job. And so I have to try to set little achievable goals for myself to make sure I stay on track.
I was just wondering, you've written some pretty heartbreaking stuff. I know I'm really shocked for that. But is there any character that really broke your heart? I don't know. I guess what character was the hardest for you to write because it was just so sad? And also, I just finished Arrowwood, so.
Oh, okay, yeah, that one is sad. And Arden Arrowwood, that was probably one of the more tragic characters for me to write. And I felt very into her character, I was there with her. I thought that was a very tragic story, what she'd been through. So that was a good one. But yeah, generally, once the book is over, it's like those characters are all dead to me, and I don't want to think about them anymore. Just people ask often, will you write a sequel to this one or that one? And I wouldn't rule it out because sometimes I do really like the characters, and if I had a good idea for them, I would continue. But they'll be like, oh, do you wonder, what Lucy's doing now? And I'm like, I've forgotten their names, half of the characters. It's just they're dead to me. I have to move on. I got to write this new book. And I just feel like I kind of have to do that. You gotta cut them loose. But it is funny. I wish I would have kept a list of all my characters' names. Because people ask me about character, I'm like, just remind me who that was and what they did, and it'll come back.
Any other questions? Oh, yeah.
Do you have a favorite among your books?
Well, not really, but I think with The Way to Blood, just the journey that took me on, that I'll always remember that, and that'll be special to me because, you know, it was so devastating when I lost my job, and then I was just at home with my babies for like a year writing this book. I didn't have a writing group at the time. I didn't know any writers. It was very isolated. And then all of a sudden with that book, when it went to auction, it was selling in all these other countries. They were flying me all around the country, doing all these big exciting events and things, and it just totally changed my life. And so I think it'll always be special to me in that way because The Way to Blood is the one that got that all started.
All right, well, oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry. Have you ever, or do you ever suffer from imposter syndrome or other insecurities that you can tell us?
Yes, all the time. And I talk to aspiring writers about this all the time. What I have learned now is that it's a cycle. It was very hard, you know, when I was writing The Way to Blood and I didn't know, is this even a real book? Will anyone ever want to read this? And it was hard to believe what was happening with that when it really was going to be published. And I started thinking this book is terrible. They shouldn't publish it. After you go through the editing process and everyone's tearing it apart, you know, nitpicking on this book, and you start to feel like it's not good anymore. And then when I had to write the next book, I thought, well, I can't do it. How am I going to write another book? How am I going to write a book that was as good as that book? And what if I only had one book in me? What if I can't do this? And I would go through ups and downs, you know, every other day. It'd be like, oh my gosh, I can do this. I enjoy this. This is working. And then the next day, I'm like, this is the worst thing I've ever written. It's the worst thing anyone's ever written. It's terrible. And what I learned over time was just that cycle will come and go. And so I still have that now. I still have all of those fears now and all those doubts. And I just know that in the end, if I just keep writing, the book will be done. And then once it's done, then I'll revise it and then I'll make it better. And that I will reach that end point. And just to know when those waves come of all that self-doubt, that I'll get through it, I'll get past it. And it's just part of the process. So hopefully that helps, and just to know that happens to every writer. And if there's a writer who never thinks their work is bad, well, they got a big ego. Their work might not be all that great.
Well, yeah, I think I just think it happens to everyone. We all deal with that, and it's sort of like this weird, it ebbs and flows, and it depends on what you're doing, and so you just have to sort of like try to keep it in check. I think everyone deals with imposter syndrome, and they're just sort of trying to make it appear like
right.
they feel really confident in everything.
Exactly, yeah. If anyone thinks I'm super confident or anything, I'm very much not. You can probably tell. But over time, you know, I just get used to it over time. Yes.
So you mentioned that you have a new editor. You had a new editor for this book, and what can you say about the author-editor relationship? That seems, you know, in the whole writing process, what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, and I know quite a few editors. I've worked with various editors, just, you know, learning books from them or meeting them at events, talking to them about books. And every editor that I've met, they're all different, but they're all just such smart people who just love books so much. And so all of them, I think, are really great. And the ones that I've worked with have been very different. I think some editors are more, you know, encouraging, whereas others are maybe more critical, that sort of thing. But something that the ones that I worked with have in common, they're not usually, you know, telling me what to do. They are questioning things. Oh, is this, you know, do you think this is expressing what you want it to express? Or, you know, have you thought through this or that? And I really like that, where they're just they're not really putting their own stamp on it by telling you what to do. They're just asking you questions to help you make your work better. And I think that is a sign of a good editor. And you do have to trust them a lot, but you also have to know when to kind of, you know, choose your battles, and maybe there's something you do want to push back on if you believe in it. And in my experience, my old editor, you know, if I could explain why I thought something needed to be a certain way and that made sense, then she would be okay with it. And so I think there's just a really great working relationship back and forth between people who love stories and just want them to be the best that they can be.
All right.
There's one more.
Okay.
The new
like, can we know a little something about the one you're working on?
Yeah, you'd like to. It's set in a kind of a dead-end Missouri town where there's a meatpacking plant nearby. And it's about these two sisters. Their older cousin is finally going to break out of this town. She's going to go to college. She got a scholarship and she's going to leave. But she vanishes overnight while she's staying at their house babysitting them. And there's blood left behind, but they don't know what happened to her. And so the book really starts, it's about 8 years after that, when the girls are a little bit older and some rumors are going around and they're going to try to figure out what happened to her before they leave this town. So it's dark and creepy, again, of course, it's what I do, but it's also a lot about family and generational stuff and like just the obstacles, especially for women, but anyone trying to leave this small town environment and get out. Not everyone wants you to get out. Some people would rather you stay and keep you in your place.
Some people are jealous of your success.
We're not letting her out of this
Keep
town.
you down.
Yeah.
All right, well, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us tonight. There are copies of books for sale out front, and then Laura will be signing books across the hall.
Yes, and feel free to stop and talk to me, whether you're getting a book or not. If you want to say hi or have a question or anything, I'd be happy to.
Yeah, thank you so much for talking.
Thank you. Thank you very much.